Good evening and welcome to ILTV's Israel Weekly. I'm Gabrielle Weiniger, filling in for Aaron Porras with an in-depth look at the headlines from the Middle East this week. To discuss all the latest diplomatic and political developments from across the region, we're joined in studio by former Israeli lawmaker for the Labour Party, Dr. Anat Wilf, and Naftali Ben-Simon, ruling Likud Party MP and Israeli Parliament member candidate. Welcome to you both. Coming up this evening, a hard time for hardliners in Iran as Hassan Rouhani, the country's reformist president, is re-elected. Meanwhile, Donald Trump speaks out against the Islamic Republic for sponsoring terror, signing a $100 billion military deal with regional rival Saudi Arabia. Iran is now accusing the US of warmongering, and the US strikes what could have been Iranian-directed forces in southern Syria as Israeli opposition lawmakers call to strike in Damascus. But first, the US president is in the Middle East in search of the ultimate deal between Israelis and Palestinians. For his first ever presidential trip abroad, Donald Trump touched down in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to much fanfare last Sunday. Israel reportedly upping its game for the official welcoming ceremony at Ben Gurion Airport on Monday. The US President and First Lady were in Jerusalem meeting with the Israeli President and Prime Minister before traveling to the West Bank city of Bethlehem Tuesday to meet Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. Speaking about the prospect of a peace deal between the two conflicting sides, Trump said it's one of the toughest deals of all. Take a listen to that before we break it down from there.
I believe that a new level of partnership is possible and will happen, one that will bring greater safety to this region, greater security to the United States, and greater prosperity to the world. This includes a renewed effort at peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And I thank the Prime Minister for his commitment to pursuing the peace process. He's working very hard at it. It's not easy. I've heard it's one of the toughest deals of all, but I have a feeling that we're going to get there eventually. I hope.
I also look forward to working closely with you to advance peace in our region, because you have noted so succinctly that common dangers are turning former enemies into partners. And that's where we see something new and potentially something very promising. It won't be simple, but for the first time in many years, and Mr. President, for the first time in my lifetime, I see a real hope for change.
I am truly hopeful that America can help Israel and the Palestinians forge peace and bring new hope to the region and its people. I also firmly believe that if Israel and the Palestinians can make peace, it will begin a process of peace all throughout the Middle East, and that would be an amazing accomplishment.
Right, Dr. Wilf, I'd like to start with you. This all seemed very cordial and well rehearsed. Where is that big announcement that everyone was expecting? And can we expect Trump to take any deep steps towards peace on the road to restarting peace negotiations?
Not yet, and I don't know regarding that there was an expectation of any major breakthrough or announcements at this visit. I think even just having the tone of let's discuss peace, peace is possible, using the word again, having the Israeli Prime Minister say things like for the first time in his lifetime, he sees potential for change, chance for hope. Even that in itself, the American president could also already see as an achievement. This has not been the tone in recent years. It's been much more acrimonious. So even to have that, that's something. But at one point, if any progress is to be made, generalities will have to be put aside for details. There was a view over the decades that to make peace in this region, one has to engage in constructive ambiguity. You know, let's fudge the issues, let's not use specific language. We've learned that this constructive ambiguity has been very destructive because everyone understood what they wanted and it was opposed. So now I think we need an era of constructive specificity. we need to be very, very clear on the details. We need to be very clear when the Israeli Prime Minister says a realistic peace, the conditions for peace. What does it mean? It definitely means that the Arab world needs to start using very clear language about the fact that the Jewish people have come home, that they're not colonialists, that they're not foreigners. The Palestinians, it's not just about incitement, it's not just about two states. The Palestinians will need to understand that there will not be return. Any notion that they can make demands on Israel within the Green Line should be over. Those are the kind of specific statements that if we are ever to make real progress, we'll need to hear.
We haven't heard those statements from either side. In fact, were you expecting a big announcement, Mr. Simon?
Oh, well, before answering your question,
Please.
I would like to send my condolences to the British people after the horrific terror attack last night in Manchester. Young people who went to see a music concert, and 22 of them didn't return home. And this reminds us to refer to the Trump visit to the area, that the Palestinian issue is still a very important issue, but the global terror, Islamic terror, is still the main threat to the world. And to come back to your question, Trump visit to Israel, we need some gestures and symbols. After 8 years of Obama, Trump brought in a large scale those symbols.
What did he bring that was new?
Yeah, well, we need something to hug us, the both sides, the Palestinians and the Israeli, because there is such a suspicious between everyone in this area. So he started in Riyadh, and he opened the heart of the Sunnis, Muslims and leaders, and from there he came in a direct flight from Riyadh to Tel Aviv. And he also had a very constructive discussion with Netanyahu and Mahmoud Abbas today in Bethlehem. So, as Dr. Wilfs mentioned, of course we will arrive sooner or later to the details.
What do you both think went on behind the closed doors, with Israeli members of parliament, with Bibi Netanyahu? Do you think there was any pressure, for example, on freezing settlements or core issues here in the peace process?
Well, those issues were actually dealt with already, as you always do with big official visits. The kind of trust-building measures were already carried through on the eve of President Trump arriving, the ability to build in Area C. At the moment, what is taking place are things that do not cost much. Prime Minister Netanyahu could pass these measures without really endangering his coalition. Someone like Naftali Bennett will yell a little, but beyond that, nothing has changed. But if we do get to the point, it's still far out, of actually negotiating an agreement, there will be no escaping the tough issues. I do believe that on this visit, there is no desire on behalf of any of the participants, including the Americans, to delve into the core issues at the moment. If they can just come back saying, look, the sides have made positive statements, they're now talking about moving forward, they've expressed hope, he can already check the box of saying, I had a successful first visit. Add to that the contracts for weapons signed with Saudi Arabia, which are the real purpose of this entire visit. He can come back and say, I had a first solid, good visit.
But still, it's a very important message here to renew the negotiation and to come again to the table between the both sides, something that didn't happen in the recent years. And yes, of course, the core issue is Mahmoud Abbas is able to control, is he the leader of the Palestinian people? We don't have answer for that question. Is he the leader in Gaza? is he the leader in the West Bank? Or maybe he's talking for a very small minority group that wants to show the image or to improve the image of the Palestinians in the world. So we still have a very long way to do, and we are just in the beginning. But for President Trump, who has so many troubles at home, to come to Israel and to show some respect to the both sides, to go to the Western Wall, the Yad Vashem, Bethlehem, the church, and talk to the leaders, it's a good start for him, and maybe, who knows, we will bring something that we didn't have for many years.
But there was some expectation that there would be a big announcement, for example, on moving the US embassy to Jerusalem. Do you think that some people are disappointed, or perhaps he didn't fulfill those hopes that he raised during his campaign, his election campaign to become president?
Well, we used to say in Hebrew, what you see from here, you don't see from there. It's the same also in the United States. What you say before, during the campaign, it's not something that easy to do when you are president. And the global issues are much more complicated, and it's not something that it's done just like that. But I do believe that at least in this administration, I believe that sooner or later, the issue of moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem will have to be on the track and to decide yes or no. For now, there is not a decision, not for yes and not for no. So we'll wait.
Let's take it back to Bethlehem for a moment. Do you think that Abbas has a mandate? Do you think he's been able to garner Palestinian support for peace at all? Do you think he has any way of doing this? I mean, we did see protests in the West Bank city of Ramallah and elsewhere across the West Bank.
So I think personally the issue is much less about the Palestinian leader, whoever it is. The issue of the conflict was always far greater than the Palestinians themselves. It was always about how the Arab and the Islamic world viewed the Jewish sovereign presence in their midst. And I think when we have the Prime Minister, we have the American President speaking about the conditions for peace, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about the possibility that the Arab world in its entirety, or at least critical countries or members of the Arab world, will begin to look at Israel rather than a humiliating presence in their midst as an ally, as a legitimate presence, and with that will begin to give legitimacy not just to Israel as a state, but to the very presence of a Jewish people as a people who have come home. If the Arab world begins to create those conditions in that environment, the Palestinians will have no choice but to ultimately compromise. If they realize that there is no one to support them in their maximalist visions, in the idea that they can return to the state of Israel, that one day Palestine from the river to the sea will be free. If they begin to understand that they are isolated in their maximalist claims, that those are no longer supported by the Arab world, then indeed we have the conditions for peace, and they will find that Israel, as it always has been, is willing to divide this land between a Jewish state and an Arab state if this truly means that the conflict is over once and for all, and the Arab world accepts us as their legitimate equals.
Before we delve into the Arab world, would you like to just give some closing remarks on Trump's visit, Mr. Ben-Simon?
I think it was a good trip to the Middle East. It was an important one. It was building trust between the parties, between the countries. I think in the political track, we are much better today than before, even with our countries, and especially vis-a-vis Iran threat. And I do believe that President Trump is bringing something new to the area, that there is a distinction, the distinction between good and evil. And this is something that didn't happen with Obama. Maybe now we'll know what is on the table. And at least, as I say, I'm not such an optimistic guy in a very, but I think it's a very important symbol to be here at this time and to talk for peace between Israelis and Israel and Palestinians.
Now to one country where Trump's visit to the region has been heavily criticised, Iran. The Islamic Republic has vowed to continue its ballistic missile program, despite calls from US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson in Saudi Arabia this week to end what he called a network of terrorism. This back and forth comes after Iran voted to re-elect Hassan Rouhani as president for a second term, with more than 57% of the vote. But defeat for his main challenger, cleric Ibrahim Raisi, may just be a setback, as experts say he's being groomed by Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei to be his next in line. Before we discuss Trump's policy on Iran and the meaning of these elections, first, what voters had to say on the streets of Tehran.
قبل که تحریمای هسته یا برداشت بقیه تحریما رو هم برداره. روابط با کشورهای خارجی که خیلی بهتر شده، ان شاءالله بهترم بشه، دنیا یه حساب دیگه ای رو ما کنه.
انتظار دارم بیکارایی که الان هستن و همشون کار داشته باشن و اینا کار پیدا کنن، همشون جوانایی که الان اومدن واسه جشن شادی کار پیدا کنن.
All right, Mr. Bin Simon, what do you think of Hassan Rouhani? Is he the best option for Iran? Is he a good option for Israel?
Well, we have to respect the choice of the Iranian people, and they choose Hassan Rouhani as to continue to be the president of the state. It's a very important country, but with a very elusive policy, something that they play in all the grounds. They support terror and they talk about peace in the region. They, it's very hard to understand the Iranian leadership, but something should be very clear. With Hassan Rouhani, in the second term, the sanction must take place. And the hard line must be very clear against Iran. If they cross the line, we should do something very clear. Now we have a very wide coalition with the Sunni countries, Israel and United States, and it's a very rare coalition to send a very clear message to Iran. There is a line that you cannot cross.
That's what Donald Trump said while he was in Israel just yesterday. He said that there is no way that Iran will be allowed to have nuclear weapons. Do you think that this could change the nuclear deal?
Not change the deal, maybe change the way that America enforces the deal. But having followed the way that Israeli elections are often covered by foreign media, I've become aware of the gap in the way that foreigners often see our choices and how we make our choices. If you listen to what these young Iranians say, they care about domestic issues. They want reform, they want jobs, they want the economy to be better. They want the sanctions lifted in the sense that they want to make sure that their country can be better integrated into the global economy. And they hope that Rouhani can do it in a way that still preserves what they think is an element of their dignity and their rights. So we're seeing a very clear choice here that is not about all the big issues we are talking about. So in that sense, this creates an opening in which the United States says, okay, we're going to make sure that the deal is enforced, but if it is enforced and if Iran is sticking to its side of the deal, we can discuss greater integration into the global economy, which is indeed also part of the deal, as long as Iran keeps its side of it.
Do you think maybe Rouhani has to take a strong stance against America now that America's called on it to end its ballistic missile program, something that they've so far refused to do?
Well, I suggest to the Iranian not to deal now with, to push the line with President Trump. He already has the North Korean issues on his mind, and I think the Iranian, who are very good dealers, they know and understand now there is a new chief in town, the new rules in town, and they don't have to cross the line. But
in that case, how do you think Tehran is looking at Trump's visit to Riyadh and to Israel, two countries that are perceived as enemies of the Shiite state?
Well, they see it in a very clear eyes that they are not part of the game. They are not part of the new world that President Trump tried to create. So if they are not in this part, they are the enemy.
Iranian TV networks went so far as to say this trip is anti-Iran. What do you think about that?
Well, what you're saying is that President Trump is in many ways reinforcing the old alliances. In that sense, he's very much a conservative. In many other senses, he's not a very conservative president. In that, he's very conservative. He's saying, I'm going through the region and I'm sticking to our old alliances. I'm not speaking of democracy. I'm not speaking of change. I'm interested in Saudi Arabia. They are our allies. There's money, there's jobs, there's weapons. This is the old style of the alliance. He goes to Israel, again, reinforcing that I'm behind Israel completely. And in that sense, he's saying America is committed to the old order in the Middle East. We are under no plans to change the order, to change the players, and we're sticking with our alliances. Naturally, this is perceived by Iran as something that is anti-Iran.
But you're saying this is nothing new, even the $1 billion deal we could have expected, the $100 billion deal.
This is new compared to what appeared under the Obama administration as an effort to forge a new Middle East whereby Iran is an important, legitimate, even valued player in shaping the region. Here you could see that Iran is more put on notice. It's not that it does not have a role, but if it behaves in a way that meets the agreements, then Iran could have a role of integrating into the region.
All right. Meanwhile, the US says the convoy it targeted in southern Syria last week may have been Iranian-directed. Another possible sign of increased tension between the two countries, but this time over Syria, and a debate over increased regional involvement from neighboring Israel, where opposition MPs are calling to destroy a Damascus crematorium that President Bashar al-Assad is allegedly using to burn the bodies of thousands of executed political prisoners. All this as the most recent round of peace talks comes to a close in Geneva. They're set to start up again next month. Let's hear what the UN Special Envoy had to say on the status of those negotiations before we open up our final debate of the night.
These experts' meetings, obviously, it's clear, do not aim and do not replace the main negotiating track. The intra-Syrian talks are focused on all four baskets, and they are meant to assist this process is meant to assist the formal sessions to enable discussions at the political level to proceed more smoothly. Expert meetings can help identify complex issues, identify options, and so on. We are not planning or aiming through this to draft a new constitution.
Because we're short on time, we'll leave the peace talks for now. I'm going to ask you something. The US says they may have targeted Iranian-directed convoy in Syria. Does that mean a ramping up of tensions between US and Iran, possibly over Syria, over the Syrian civil war?
This is too early stage. If the United States decides to truly get more involved in Syria, that's a major decision and one that is not clear that it will be effective in any way. The United States, with all due respect, does not understand what's going on in Syria, does not understand the various interests, what is the battle is for. And at the end of the day, the ability of the United States to actually have an effective intervention to shape outcomes is close to zero.
Would you agree with that?
Yes, of course. And I will add that President Trump made a decision to erase the 8 years of Obama in the Middle East in 100 days. And this is something that is a very crucial message also to Syria, to Russia, and to the Middle East. And we understand very well that what was with Syria before will not happen again, not in the scale or the freedom to kill in the killing fields of Syria. So now we're supposed to be on the political track, but it's also because President Trump sent a very clear message to Syria, to Russia, and to the region.
Maybe now's the time. Okay, that wraps up this edition of ILTV Weekly. Thank you to our guests, Dr. Anat Wilf, former Israeli lawmaker for the Labour Party, and ruling Likud Party MP and Israeli Parliament member candidate Naftali Ben-Simon.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in. We'll see you again, same time, same region, next week, only on ILTV Weekly. That's it from me and the team here in Tel Aviv. Goodbye for now.